is not simply the way life comes to us, but is the way all things really exist. In these talks, I've had to say a good deal about prayer. And before going on to my main subject tonight, I'd like to deal with a difficulty some people find about the whole idea of prayer. Somebody put it to me by saying, I can believe in God all right, but what I can't swallow is this idea of him listening to several 100 million human beings who are all addressing him at the same moment. And I find quite a lot of people feel that difficulty.
Hello again. We're here returning to our study of Mere Christianity, the book by C.S. Lewis. Today we'll be looking at, we're beginning a section on Christian behavior. If you remember back to our previous lessons, the book is basically divided into 4 parts. The first part is kind of titled Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. He sets the stage there for the foundation of why we would believe in a God. Is there a God? He goes on in book 2 to talk about what Christians believe. And so there he goes from, is there a God? If there is a God, what kind of God would that be? And then we get down to something looking like the God we know of the Jews. And then he breaks through with this shocking alternative, which is where Jesus comes into play. So we finished the first 2 books, and now he starts to talk about Christian behavior. Now I want to stop here for just a minute and remind ourselves that this is C.S. Lewis. He's not an apostle. He's a Christian writer, but he's writing in the context of his time and his understanding. And so some of the things, and you might be reading along, I hope you are, you might be reading along and say, that's kind of strange. But again, remember, he's writing this, and he did this in conjunction with radio lectures that he had during World War II. And so he now comes to Christian behavior. And so that's part, he's told us what Christians believe in general. He doesn't say, he doesn't direct us into any kind of denomination, Christian denomination or Christian church. He just said this in general is what Christians believe. And basically is that there is a God. He is the God of goodness and mercy. He is the God of the Jews. He is the God of Abraham, of Moses. He is the God of Isaiah. And Jesus was his son. Jesus came to earth to give us a clear picture of God and what he wants us to be like and to do on this earth. And that was the shocking alternative. But that's not where it ends. In fact, it doesn't end. He also shows us when Jesus dies and when he's resurrected, that's an example for us. For we must die too and live in Christ, live a life that reflects Christ and becomes closer to God. So that brings us up to Christian behavior. And so he's got a series of things he's going to discuss here that reflect how we as Christians should behave. Again, the key term here is should, because we're continually grappling with evil, with Satan. Satan wants to win our souls as much or more than God does. So the first section in this book, Christian Behavior, is entitled The 3 Parts of Morality. So as with most Sunday school lessons, which we kind of follow that format, we read a little bit, we stop, we discuss, we read a little bit more. So let's go there. So we start the three parts of morality. There's a story about a schoolboy who was asked what he thought God was like. He replied that as far as he could make out, God was the sort of person who always was snooping around to see if anyone is enjoying himself and then trying to stop it. And I'm afraid that is the sort of idea that the word morality raises in a good many people's mind. Something that interferes, something that stops you having a good time. In reality, moral rules are the directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the running of that machine. That is why these rules at first seem to be constantly interfering with our natural inclinations. When you're being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, no, don't do it like that. Because of course there are all sorts of things that look all right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but do not really work. All right, so really moral rules are directions for running the human machine. There are two problems with this human machine. First of all, there's us. We are a problem in the human machine. The second problem is others. And so in society, we not only have to get along with ourselves, we have to get along with others. So what we see here, there are two ways in which the human machine goes wrong. One is when human individuals drift apart from one another, or else collide with one another and do one another damage by cheating or bullying. The other is when things go wrong inside the individual, when the different parts of him or her, his different faculties, desires, and so on, either drift apart or interfere with one another. You can get an idea plain if you think of us as a fleet of ships sailing in formation. The voyage will be a success only in the first place if the ships do not collide and get in another's way. And secondly, if each ship is seaworthy and has her engines in good order. As a matter of fact, you cannot have either of these two things without the other. If the ships keep on having collisions, they will not remain seaworthy very long. On the other hand, if their steering gears are out of order, they will not be able to avoid collisions. But there's one thing we still have to take into account. We have not asked where the fleet is trying to get to. That's the important question. Where is the fleet going? Morality then seems to be concerned with three things. First, with fair play and harmony between individuals. Second, what might be called tidying up or harmonizing the things inside each individual. And third, with the general purpose of human life as a whole. What man was made for, what course the whole fleet ought to be on. So, let's stop there. So morality, moral rules, moral laws, we call them, they are concerned with three things: fair play and harmony between individuals, tidying up or harmonizing the things inside each one of us, and then thirdly, with the general purpose of human life as a whole. What is the purpose and meaning of this, not only for us individually, but as a society? Almost all people at all times have agreed in theory that human beings ought to be honest and kind and helpful to one another. But though it is natural to begin with all that, if our thinking about morality stops there, we might just as well not have thought it at all. Unless we go to the second thing, the tidying up inside each human being. We're only deceiving ourselves. You cannot make men good by law. And without good men, you cannot have a good society. That is why we must go on to think of the second thing, of morality inside the individual. Now, you might have heard this conversation. Well, they're not a good person, but they'll do what I want them to do, and we'll get to where we want to go. Have you ever heard that? So this is the person that I'm gonna support. I'm gonna get behind this person. I know they're evil. I know they're not very good person. But this is the captain I'm going to choose to guide my ship. Have you ever heard that? I have. And I often wonder, where in the world does that kind of reason come from? Now, when we talk about you cannot make men good by law, and without good men, you cannot have a good society. Sometimes we have forgotten that. So, that's not the end, though. We are now getting to the point at which different beliefs about the universe lead to different behavior. And it would seem at first sight very sensible to stop before we got there and just carry on with those parts of morality that all sensible people agree. But can we? Remember that religion involves a series of statements about facts, which must either be true or false. If they are true, one set of conclusions will follow about the right sailing of the human fleet. If they are false, quite a different set. For example, let us go back to the man who says that a thing cannot be wrong unless it hurts some other human being. He quite understands that he must not damage the other ship in the convoy, but he honestly thinks that what he does to his own ship is simply his own business. But does not it make a difference whether his ship is his own property or not? Does it not make a great difference whether I am, so to speak, the landlord of my own mind and body, or only a tenant responsible to the real landlord? If somebody else made me for his own purposes, then I shall have a lot of duties which I should not have if I simply belong to myself. Christianity asserts that every individual human being is going to live forever, and this must be either true or false. Now, there are a good many things which would not be worth bothering about if I were only going to live 70 years, but which I'd better bother about very seriously if I'm going to live forever. It might be absolute hell in 1,000,000 years. In fact, if Christianity is true, hell is the precisely correct term for what it would be. And immortality makes this other difference, which by and by has a connection with the difference between totalitarianism and democracy. If individuals lived only 70 years, then a state or nation or civilization which may last for 1,000 years is more important than an individual. But if Christianity is true, then the individual is not only more important, but incomparably more important, for he is everlasting, and the life of a state or a civilization compared with his is only a moment. It seems then that if we are to think about morality, we must think of all three departments: relations between man and man, things inside each man, and relations between man and the power that made him. We can all cooperate in the first one. Disagreements begin with the second and become more serious with the third. It's dealing with the third that the main difference between Christian and non-Christian morality come out. For the rest of this book, I'm going to assume the Christian point of view and look at the whole picture as it will be if Christianity is true. So now he's made his case. Okay? The rest of this book, and there are about 150 pages left, is going to be assuming that Christianity is true. So, if that's the case, then now we are in the thick of Christian behavior. So, if we're beings that were created for a period of time here on this earth, but in reality, we're created for eternity, which I have a hard time thinking about, but it's kind of infinity, then there's several things we need to be aware of. According to this longer scheme, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal virtues, and the remaining 3 are called theological virtues. The cardinal ones are those all civilized people recognize. The theological are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. I shall deal with the theological ones later on. At present, I'm talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. These are called cardinal virtues because they, as we are to say, pivotal. The word cardinal, the root word of cardinal, is the hinge of a door, so it's pivotal. So these 4 cardinal virtues are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you're doing and what is likely to come of it. All right. Now, most people hardly think of prudence as one of the virtues. In the first place, there's a misunderstanding. Most children show plenty of prudence about doing things they're really interested in, think them quite sensible. But we know that Christ never meant for us to remain children, especially with respect to intelligence. He told us not only to be as harmless as doves, but also to be wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. He wants us to be simple, single-minded, affectionate, teachable, as children are, but he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job. It's true that God will not love you any less or have less use of you if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. He has room for all people. The proper motto is not, be good, sweet maid, and let who can be clever, but be good, sweet maid, and don't forget that this involves being clever as you can. God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than any other slackers. Christianity is an education in itself. That is why an uneducated believer like Bunyan was able to write a book that has astonished the whole world. Temperance is unfortunately one of those words that has changed its meaning. It now usually means teetotalism, but in the days when the cardinal virtue was christened temperance, it meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not specially to drink, but to all pleasures, and it meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that Christians ought to be teetotalers. Mohammedanism, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. And he goes on with talking about drinking, but drinking is not really what he's getting at here with temperance. A man who makes his golf or motorcycle the center of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge or a dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Of course, it does not show on the outside so easily. Bridge mania or golf mania do not make you fall down in the middle of the road, but God is not deceived by externals. Justice means much more than the sort of thing that goes on in law courts. It is the name for everything we should call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, and all that side of life. And fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. There's one further point about virtues that ought to be noticed. There's a difference between doing some particular just or temperate action and being a just or temperate man. Someone who's not a good tennis player may now and then make a good shot. What you mean by being a good player is a man whose eyes and muscles and nerves have been so trained by making innumerable good shots that they now can be relied upon. The point is that God will not refuse you admission to His eternal world if you have not got certain qualities of character. The point is that if people have not got at least the beginning of those qualities inside them, then no possible external conditions could make a heaven for them. That is, could make them happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness God intends for them. So what does God want? He wants us to realize, He wants obedience, and then He wants action. So we get the cardinal virtues. And then He moves to something called social morality. The first thing to get clear about Christian morality between man and man is that in this department, Christ did not come to preach any brand new morality. The golden rule of the New Testament is a summing up of what everyone at bottom has always known to be right. People need to be reminded more often than they need to be instructed. The real job of every moral teacher is to keep on bringing us back time after time to the old simple principles which we are all so anxious not to see. The second thing is to get a clear picture that Christianity has not and does not profess to have a detailed political program for applying do as you would be done by to a particular society at a particular moment. People say the church ought to give us a lead. That's true if they mean it in the right way, but false if they mean it in the wrong way. By the church, they ought to mean the whole body of practicing Christians. But of course, when they ask for a lead from the church, most people mean they want the clergy to put out a political program or some kind of project. That is silly. The job is really on us, on the layman. The application of Christian principles, say to trade unionism or education, must come from Christian trade unionists and Christian schoolmasters. All the same, the New Testament, without going into details, gives us a pretty clear hint of what a fully Christian society would look like. First, it tells us there will be no passengers or parasites. If a man does not work, he does not eat. On the other hand, it's always insisting on obedience. Obedience and outward marks of respect from all of us to properly appointed magistrates, from children to parents. And I'm afraid this is going to be very unpopular, from wives to husband. Thirdly, it is to be a cheerful society, full of singing and rejoicing, and regarding worry or anxiety as wrong. Courtesy is one of the Christian virtues, and the New Testament hates what is busybody. You will find this again and again about anything that's really Christian. Everyone is attracted by bits of it and wants to pick out those bits and leave the rest. That is why we do not get much further. That's why people are fighting for quite opposite things. Can both say they're fighting for Christianity. A Christian society is not going to arrive until most of us really want it, and we're not going to want it until we become fully Christian. I cannot learn to love my neighbor as myself till I learn to love God. And I cannot learn to love God except by learning to obey Him. And so, as I warned you, we're driven on to something inward, driven from social matters to religious matters. For the longest way round is the shortest way home. So we end here today with this idea of it comes down to each of us. And again, one of the striking contributions that Jesus gave us and taught us is that there is this idea of a personal relationship with God. And that's what's important, because if you have a personal relationship with God, that will flow outside of you to your external situations, your external environments. In other words, to other people. You remember, Christ told us there were two important commandments. One related to God and one related to our neighbors. But both of them, He told us to love both God and our neighbors. And what was interesting, He told us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we'll get to that, and we'll talk about that later. So we end today with this idea of the starting of Christian behavior. There are virtues, that we need to know about and practice. And then we need to look for answers. Really, we need to look for answers in the Bible and in the churches we go to. And we need to be the answers. So again, thank you for spending this time with us today. We'll continue our discussion of mere Christianity in future lessons. Hope you have a good day.